If you want to see it, the contrast, that there was a PBS documentary called The Winding Gulf that was well done. They had a native West Virginian and a storyteller interspersed throughout the whole documentary. That was Bug Stover. Now, the interesting thing about that was, remember I said I've been working with the folks in Wyoming County, the circuit clerk, and all. Well, he's the circuit clerk in Wyoming County, and he's a storyteller. He collects ghost stories, he collects Appalachian stories, and grounding the documentary in the occasional story from him throughout it brought a better sense, I thought, of what my experience in West Virginia is. It's a better image of the people. I've heard my friends complain, yeah, they're going to do a story about West Virginia. They're going to bring up the guy with the 1 2 to say something, that everybody's going to laugh at. And that's the image that's been portrayed. And it's not the image I know. It's not an image I've ever seen. It's not the feeling that I have dealing with people here. Feeling that I have was in that documentary, and I've only seen that documentary once.
What was it called again?
The Winding Gulf, Gulph, Gulf River.
Okay, as in Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, so I just to kind of try to answer your question, I would say for journalists, it's not really good media, bad media, or feel good media, because we need to tell you stories that are true, and the truth hurts sometimes. So we can't just give you feel good stories about West Virginia all the time. So for me, it's about accuracy versus inaccuracy. And I think what we're saying is that national media sometimes just doesn't get it right, and it's inaccurate. And we who live here, we get to know the place better, and so we can be, I feel like, more accurate in our reporting.
A more kind of local battle that I think many of us could fight. I think a lot of this dialogue has been taking place recently around J.A. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy, which, is one person's story about growing up in Appalachia and escaping Appalachia.
I think he says Appalachia.
Oh, does that? Right, that tells the whole story. And I think that's gotten so much coverage lately, as if he's speaking for an entire region. And as I understand it, it's that book is under consideration to be the whole campus read for next year.
No.
So everybody will, all the freshmen, incoming freshmen, so many of you will have to read that. And I don't say that that it shouldn't be, but I think if it's going to be, then we all need to step up and talk about how this is just this is one story, right? And we cannot take that one story to be the story of everybody in this region.
I'll give you a good deal on my copy. Is it signed? I'll sign it, but.
And I think of this too, like this conversation that we're having here is we're moving into what our next question is, which is perfect, is what in your fields calls for the need to address overgeneralizations and stereotypes about the region. We're already talking about that. If you guys have other things you would like to speak to about that for your field, or did your question speak to this? Mr. in the front shirt with Empire Strikes Back. Mr. Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, I was asking that because I'd never heard of this book. And when you said it was like talked about forever, I was like, I guess I'm under a rock. So I was Googling it.
Oh, okay. So do you want to start with that, guys, and maybe speak? Yeah. What in your work speaks to the need to address overgeneralization?
Yeah.
You want to start at this end?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, good. One of the things that's always struck me in terms of writing about Appalachia is that it so often focuses on those areas that are most in need of change, and yet they never. I mean, there's very little written that in the sort of Appalachian scholarship that looks at those areas that are doing well. And so one of the pictures that's really spoke to me is number 18. And you know, what I loved about this photo is that it could be any sort of middle class neighborhood anywhere. You know, it's very new, very it's a very different image. But there's so little done on what it was that enabled parts of the region to thrive, to change, to become much more mainstream, if you will. Not that mainstream's always good, but to do well economically. And there are pockets of Appalachia that are doing well, and yet we haven't sort of really investigated what it was that enabled them to move forward. What resources did they bring? What human capital? What social capital was there that and what did they do politically? A thing that I always like to use in my Appalachian classes is we think of the four states, Mississippi and West Virginia is usually 48th or 49th or 50th. In the 1930s, if you looked at the four states, North Carolina would have been near the bottom, and now, well, it's beginning to change. So I have no idea how long that's going to last. But you see North Carolina as this sort of thriving state economically in the South, one of the better ones. And so if we want to understand the poor regions, we also need to understand those regions that are doing well. And I love this photo for that reason. It's an image of Appalachia that we just don't normally think about. And yet we know very little about what places like Asheville, how they became this sort of booming area that it is, and Huntsville, Alabama. There are places throughout the region that I think we could learn a great deal from, and also begin to undermine that image that's so much rooted in central Appalachian coalfields.
So there's a project for somebody to start up Appalachian opulence.
Well, let me pull up number 25. The contrast here. Let me talk about the picture for a moment and weave that into what I need to say. This is one of the more recent images of West Virginia. And it's not a good image at all. The image itself, I think, does a very clear job of talking about what's happening here without knowing any context at all. When coral dies, it bleaches white. All the marine organisms bleed, it bleaches white. Bones bleach white in the sun. And these tanks are kind of the bleached white bones of an industry. And it is too often the image that people have in their minds of not only Appalachia, but of the entire Rust Belt, which corresponds to a lot of Appalachia, not all of it. The Midwest, at least the eastern portion of the Midwest, is the Rust Belt. Of course, in keeping with my theme, I've got the contrast between green and white again. One more ad for martial arts. But it's that little speck of white, and the little speck of white and the green in the background, because the background maintains that verdant color. even with bleached white bones in the front. And this is the image that people are taking away from Appalachia. The dead parts, the bleached bones in the sun. And this is one of those instances where it's a pretty accurate description of it. But it's not everything. There's not a picture of the commission that we put together. Actually, I'm on talk about what happened and to say what can be done to keep it from happening again. And again, in a study of contrasts, one legislature passed a number of rules to keep this from happening again. The next legislature that came around repealed all of those rules. Again, the sword strikes both ways. But there is some hope in all of this. The hope is that we can do things about it. And that's the unwritten story still. The unwritten story is that there are still a lot of people that are not part of that second legislature that are saying something needs to be done and something will be done. And it provides us the opportunity to be a model. Now I'll put in a plug for this university because this university is trying to do things. One of my specialty areas is water. And I'm also a sanitary engineer. So in civil and environmental engineering, I work with my colleagues there to do things about water and about air. And so those are the stories that sometimes just don't get told. That we are an integral part of all of this. I am off, in fact. After this meeting, I have to be in Washington, D.C. this evening because I'm on a National Academy of Sciences committee at COLA students. I'm one of the experts on it. I helped to write the COLA students. I'm from West Virginia. And so we're doing stuff.
I think that's a really important point and a nice segue to Mary Kay that we are doing things, and that it's people from West Virginia who are doing things too. It's not we're just helping the poor West Virginians and Appalachians to better themselves and make life improve. So how could you speak to that, Mary Kay?
Well, first of all, I mean, I feel like projects like this are about getting it's actually like hearing from people who don't always get heard from on this issue. And I was thinking about, we were talking, there was I think it's UC Annenberg, their School of Journalism, did a project called Intersections. It was basically this idea that this area of LA is only known for crime. That's all the stories that get done here. And so that whole project was about saying, well, no, we're going to actually let people tell stories about their community and community blogs and all those things to actually say, tell us about your community in your words. And that's what I was kind of thinking, like that this was a little bit like that. But as Emily said earlier too, it is about making sure, and as journalists, that we give voices to all the people in our region, not just the sort of pornography of poverty and it's about saying we tell the story.
Yeah, and I'll just build off of that because we really come from the same perspective here with this. So the question is really about, so how do we address these, the overgeneralizations and the stereotypes? And going back to the answer to your question, which was that it's about being accurate in our reporting, and that takes time, and time costs money, and it also, besides time and money, it also takes a desire for a journalist to want to report that way and to want to spend the time and to get to know a community. I know we've been doing a lot of like national media bashing, but I will say, after the Upper Big Branch mine disaster, Howard Burkus from NPR nearly moved to southern West Virginia, to do his reporting, and has done some excellent reporting about coal mining in West Virginia and about labor issues. And so, I mean, it takes a news agency wanting to make that commitment, to say, well, let's send Howard Burkus to West Virginia a lot. Let's pay his hotel room bill a lot, and, his per diem so that he can be there and so that he can tell that story, get to know that community. He also worked with West Virginia Public Broadcasting to get into some of these homes where he was able to really humanize the story. And so I think that was very smart too of this national media outlet to come to its local partner, to its state partner, and say, help us tell this story the best that we can tell it because you know this place and you know these people. And so it was a real collaborative approach to some of his storytelling that I thought was just great. So I think that it takes a desire and it takes investment from the journalist's part to help make sure that we're telling an accurate story.
But what's going to happen if the government gets rid of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting?
Well, we could stay here for another hour.
I think that's an important issue.
Yeah.
And the fact that newspapers no longer have investigative journalism or large investigative journalism staff
because
that can,
money, right?
Because it costs money. And some of that is particularly young people that don't subscribe to newspapers, that want everything for free and don't want to pay for the infrastructure that
don't have the money to pay for the infrastructure.
Information is not, information is not free.
Right.
Yes, information is not free, and I think that unfortunately, this is a whole other issue. But I think that the internet gave us the false impression that information is free and it should always be free to us. But no, it costs money to do that kind of work.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to, Emily, you were talking about earlier that there are many more channels now for information. And there's, we in journalism have looked at technology as a way for communities to be their own reporters, right? And to engage in that. And I wanted to, and probably Roger, maybe you could speak to this, because you're crowdsourcing images. What effect does the digital divide have? If you're in McDowell and because I've done projects down there at the Kimmel Memorial and tried to, get people engaged in telling stories. But if you can't tweet it out or have, Facebook, you don't have broadband access, you could, it doesn't work.
Sure. I think that's an excellent point. However, with this particular project, the digital divide has virtually disappeared. I mean, it's been more of a digital cohesion, if you will. And so whether folks have broadband access at home in McDowell County, which statistically I'd say is pretty unlikely.
Yeah.
In most places, almost everyone has a phone, and we've seen a fair amount. I mean, I would venture to say 15% of our submissions are mobile phone. Images.
Yeah, right.
And several of those images have made it into our sort of curated collection.
Right.
And so if somebody can get somewhere where there's a cell signal, or even McDonald's and connect to the free Wi-Fi there, which I do when I'm in Welch, because that's the only place you can connect.
We've done it too.
Yeah, and so and you file those images, you post those images to Instagram or whatever the case may be. It is a real problem, and especially in West Virginia. I mean, if we're going to find a way forward, and then again, this is a whole different panel discussion, but we have to be able to embrace technology, and our legislators have to be willing and able to court industries that are going to come in and build that infrastructure, that technology, backbone, so that we're already communicating every way that we possibly can, but it shouldn't be so labor intensive for somebody who might want to work from home, or if they had the opportunity to work from home a few days a week, to be able to do that.
Let's, Rosemary, why don't you speak to also why you see the need in your work for addressing overgeneralizations and stereotypes as well?
Yeah, I would just, kind of piggyback on things that several people have said. This is more, not so much, me wearing my folklorist hat, but me wearing my English ed hat, because I also work with our English education majors, and regularly teach the composition methods course. And in that class, I'm always sort of stressing the importance of place-based education and that kind of thing. And I think that what's remarkable to me when we start talking about that is how much resistance there is to place-based learning initially, and especially in many cases from students who are natives, because they will tell you themselves, many of them, when we start talking about this, and I ask them to sort of write down their thinking about this, they're like, well, there's nothing to say about where I came from. There's nothing there, right? Everything is outside. That's why I got out of that town, so that I don't have to think about it anymore. And many of them tell me that the message that they hear from their high school teachers, right, is you have to get out of here if you're going to be successful. Don't stay here. Don't come back. And I really worked hard in that class to kind of change that thinking around, to get people to realize that, we only think that nothing is here because we haven't looked for it, right? And we sort of absorb this notion that all that is good and all the stories that are worth hearing is somewhere else. And so I really try to focus on getting them as teachers to think about what are ways you can have your students out in the community doing research, finding out, not just the local history and those sorts of things, but also what are the challenges in the community and what's being done to address those things. Right? Those are all, place-based learning can address those kinds of concerns as well. And in a lot of places, I think schools are one of the few places where there is regular internet access, where it's possible for students who are doing that kind of work to get it out there to a larger audience too. So, Brandon, you can speak to some of that as well.
Yes, students are very resistant to learning about their places and don't see that as valuable, and don't think that if you as a folklorist, you don't think that you have culture because you're living it.
Right.
What you do and what you believe and think and eat, that it's just what you do. It's not culture. And so people misunderstand that we all have incredibly valuable culture that we can draw upon in education. And I think, speaking to also what you guys said about media too, we can draw upon those local places and spaces of strengths to speak back to partial stories or inaccurate stories about our places and our spaces, and that really works to combat stereotypes and overgeneralization. Look at what I think you said, Roger. A lot of people in the region too, we've talked about sort of insider, outsider, but a lot of people within the region also believe stereotypes about the region and the people and who are here and why the region is the way that it is. And I think that's a really powerful way for us all to speak back, is to tell these different stories and diverse stories, and teach people about themselves and their own places as valuable, not just somewhere else out there where you can succeed in the mainstream, sort of, if you will. Yeah, it's really important, Robin.
I don't know that I have anything to add.
We're going to open this question up for a few questions from the audience.
Yeah, this isn't really a question, and I apologize for that, but it's been really fun to listen to you guys talk. And I want to maybe just get back to those pictures from the 60s for a second. It's been fascinating to listen to all this about the pictures and stories, because I think pictures are something that we all think we can interpret straightforwardly. And part of what I think you all are saying, and saying so beautifully, is that people from outside look at those pictures of Appalachia and they think they understand the story of Appalachia. I think you guys have all said really, really wonderfully that we need education in Appalachia because we need to be able to not just get pictures out, but get stories out too. So I guess I'm going to say in form of it, rather than put it as a question, take my own stand and say, I think you guys have said something really powerful about the need for education and the role of education.
Awesome. Good. I'm glad that that's coming out.
In regard to education, one thing that hasn't been said before is by encouraging higher education for Appalachian people, West Virginians, whatever, and then also encouraging them to come back to the state and go back to the communities, creating jobs for them that they could go back, will give the communities, I think, help to preserve the right of self-determination of the people. If you take away that, that's why dictating from the outside doesn't work. No one wants that. If somebody said that, no one wants that done to them. But it's going out sometimes to other states, other places, and seeing what's out there. And sometimes you can only see what will work or how it can be modified by into your community again. It'll have to be changed somewhat because people also have the idea they want to change the culture. That's been said. What hasn't been said here, there are negative parts to the culture, but there's also a part of the culture. I'm native West Virginia, my grandparents were from Shenandoah County, Virginia, which didn't make the cut into Appalachia. Anyway, it's about the same. But there's a wonderful part to the culture that personally I hope never goes away. That is not talked about enough. The family, you talked about that, is one part. The ties to family here are stronger. I had the good fortune, one of the highlights of my career as a librarian was to work in Raleigh, West Africa, often on short trips over a course of 12 years. That's a place with very strong family structure too. If you think there's poverty in West Virginia or in the Appalachian region, anyone who's ever been to West Africa is something you never get to do in Thailand. But in the course of even that library project, the digital beginning of digital services, what was voiced to me was anything that happens with the project, the people will get 30% of the gross national project was dedicated, is now being dedicated to education for the people, because that's the way of the future. If people go out and they're trained here in the United States, the contact I had for the project was trained not only in the United States, but in Germany and also in France. And then you come back, there are other people here who were in a delegation that I set up meetings for in Washington, D.C., at Library of Congress, and so on and so forth, University of Pittsburgh. They bring those ideas back. They're trained. They train other people to carry on in the future. But that right of self-determination was the key and central part of that project. So having been a native here, experience what outsiders have connected, I certainly did appreciate that. And they told me that I was different from people coming from UNESCO and all these places because I respected that. I said, what we're doing here in regard to technology, the digital library service, is we're trying to create the communication backbone. And what I've said to them, and it's both indigenous leaders and government officials, the dual representation, which is common in the indigenous community, is you decide what you're going to put through the backbone, how you're going to educate people. But to be aware of what what's happening in the world. None of us are living in isolation. It's a global world now. What do students need when they go abroad and study in the university or whatever? And then what opportunities are you going to create for them when they come back so that they can exist if we bring it back to West Virginia, for example? In McDowell County, what job is going to be for them? I was a product of a state scholarship program by Craig Lacy. That was decades ago, because I'm getting ready to retire. But there was a need for trained librarians in the state of West Virginia, so he created a scholarship program. The deal was, you went out of state, there's no program here in West Virginia. You come back, and you work 2 years. Look how long I've been here. For the state of West Virginia to prevent the brain drain. And he created jobs for people all over the state of West Virginia who were participants, full scholarship, came back to work in West Virginia and bring it up in the way that fit for here. And that self-determination is the key. I learned so much. I feel like I brought them a lot because I worked in the library with a single computer. I know how we got there. What I did was share our experiences here in this library system. And then they can take it, modify it according to their cultures, because their culture is beautiful, people are beautiful. And I would say the same for the people of West Virginia, grew you here. That was one of the things, the land and the people. And people have said that to me over and over again. There's really, really good people here in the state. It's just different. Natives don't want that part to go away. We don't want to be like New York. It's never going to be. We don't want that. I don't want it.
Nor should we want that. I think that's really important that you're speaking to the value of different cultures, and there are strengths and weaknesses and good things and bad things about every culture. No culture is all good or all bad. And my work in education looks at what you're talking about. I look at ties to family and place as strengths for people, that it's not something that holds us back and keeps us in a poor region. And looking at how connecting those ties to place and family with place-based education so that students can leave their small communities and be educated and then return home and create what their community needs. And that connecting education to place can do that, and we equip our students to be able to speak in nuanced and informed ways about their place and how our places engage in more broader conversations nationally and internationally, because we're certainly all connected now. It's definitely a global world, and our local is global, right? Like they're connected. There are not distinctions between those now, and I think that's something really important for us. Do you have any other questions on this? Do you guys want to speak to anything different on this?